I walked away from him the evening I discovered I was in love. Not because he rejected me, he never did. Not because I feared him, but because I wasn't certain I had a place in a world that suddenly felt genuine. If you've ever loved in whispers, departed without explanation, or returned seeking something deeper, then listen closely. Hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that understand what it means to love silently and to be cherished in return. So I departed on an evening when the breeze carried more weight than quiet. No luggage in my grasp, no farewell spoken, no desperate voice calling after me. Just the whisper of autumn leaves against the stone pathway of the Hale property, and the gentle tap of my footsteps as I moved carefully toward the entrance. I clutched my jacket tight with one hand and cradled the subtle curve of my belly with the other. Barely noticeable yet, that existing there like many truths I'd never found courage to voice, tucked in my pocket, was a handwritten note on ivory paper. No greeting, no name signed, just a single phrase, softer than a whisper. I selected you, but perhaps you were never meant to discover this. I placed it on the weathered wooden seat beside the side window of his office. Golden light from within cast a gentle glow onto the lawn, hazy and warm like a distant memory. Somewhere within that room, he was likely still working. Still hunched over documents, figures, inheritances. He wouldn't find the note tonight, maybe not ever. A cool breeze slipped under my collar, carrying the fragrance of the white mums I'd cared for throughout the summer. That scent brought me back to a peaceful evening weeks earlier when he approached. Me from behind in the garden. No words, no commands, just a gentle adjustment of my wrap as he draped it softly across my shoulders. His hand had remained there, tender and uncertain. His gaze when I turned was no longer made of ice. That was the instant I started falling for him, and that was when I knew I had to go. There's something harsh about timing. Love doesn't arrive when you deserve it. It appears when you're completely unprepared. Like winter's first frost when you've just begun hoping for warmth. Everyone would claim I was forced into this union, that I was traded to a man far above my station to rescue a failing household, that my father had signed away my future before his death, leaving only debts and duties. But here's the reality. I signed that agreement myself, me with complete awareness and steady hands. Nobody forced that decision on me. No man pressured me into it. The amount was stated. The need was urgent. My mother's hospital expenses were growing. My younger brother had outgrown his clothing again. So I signed, and I entered a marriage that appeared carved from stone. Cold, immovable, silent, Jonathan Hale wasn't harsh. He was controlled, methodical, a man built more from regulations than emotion. He existed in reason, in order, in arrangements. Even our ceremony was more legal than celebratory. We shared the same house for 4 months. We never shared a bedroom. He addressed me only during meals. Every request came through his secretary. Yet the evening I fainted in the corridor from exhaustion, he didn't summon anyone. He lifted me himself, carried me to my bed, sat quietly beside me while a damp cloth rested on my forehead, and the storm raged outside. When I awakened, I found him holding a cup of tea, not offering it to me, just holding it as though uncertain what came next. That was the first time he said something that didn't sound practiced. "If you ever need to go," he murmured, "just give me a sign. I won't prevent you." I wanted him to stop me, but he didn't. And now, when he had started to change, when little notes began appearing beside my breakfast plate, when he started remembering how I preferred my tea, when his eyes softened without intention, I became the one walking away. That's the part nobody will grasp. I didn't take anything except an old sketch of a bridal gown I'd drawn at 12. It was tucked between the pages of my mother's cookbook. I used to dream of creating dresses, I used to believe in lace and joy and first dances. The drawing was never completed, just like the neckline of that dream dress. Left half embroidered with a single strand of white silk. I left the actual gown hanging in the wardrobe at Hale Estate. The one I had sewn piece by piece while pretending it would someday hold meaning. I didn't bring it because I never truly wore it not in the way that mattered. My childhood house was still there. Paint fading, lights dim, but the porch swing still moved with the wind as it always had. I paused before the front door, uncertain whether to knock or simply breathe. Inside, my mother would be sleeping. My brother, perhaps dreaming of something. Beyond worry, I stood there wondering if he would read the letter and come after me. I knew the answer. Jonathan Hale wasn't the type of man who pursued, and I wasn't the type of woman who needed pursuing. Not anymore. I didn't want sympathy or apologies or vows written in gold. I simply wanted to be seen, not as an obligation fulfilled, not as part of his orderly existence, but as a woman who had quietly chosen him without reason or reward. He would never know this, but I did. And sometimes that's sufficient, a promise. Made in silence doesn't require words. It's the kind you live like a heartbeat you don't hear, but always feel. People believe it's the signature that binds you, but the truth is, by the time you lift the pen, your soul has already decided. It was late March when I first encountered the contract. The pages carried the scent of ink and desperation's edge. A man in a navy suit had arrived at the house with his leather case, speaking in smooth, emotionless tones. "It's a straightforward arrangement," he said. "No expectations, just security. Your mother keeps her house. Your brother continues school, and Mr. Hale gets a spouse." I didn't agree immediately. I made tea instead, the way Mama always did. Black with a drop of honey and nothing else. I sat quietly and gazed out the window while spring struggled to arrive outside. The man waited patiently, paid for his tea with a nod and a comment about responsibility. When he left, he handed me the envelope and said, "This remains between you and Mr. Hale." I set it on the table and didn't touch it for 3 days. Mama was in her room, breathing shallowly. Noah had grown quieter, but still tried to smile whenever I passed. The pantry was half empty, the roof still leaked, and on the third night, as thunder rolled across the hills and I mopped water from the kitchen floor, I realized something. We were running out of time. Not money, not choices, not air, just time. And that's always the cruelest of all. So I sat at the table. The house was silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the pulse in my wrist. I opened the envelope and read every word. It was colder than I expected. Marriage by agreement. Term 1 year. No public disclosure unless mutually agreed. No physical obligations. Spousal support post-dissolution optional. It wasn't a marriage. It was a transaction that I signed. Not because I wanted the money, not because I was curious about the man, and certainly not because I believed in some hidden romance waiting in a mansion of glass and mirrors. I signed because Mama deserved rest, because Noah deserved childhood, because sometimes love for others means releasing the life you thought you'd have. I told Mama the truth, at least the part she could bear. "It's a marriage," I said softly, holding her hand. "Not like you and Dad had, but it's safe." She looked at me for a long time, her eyes tired but too wise to be fooled. "Safe and good aren't always the same, Grace," she whispered. Then she squeezed my fingers as if to say, "But I know you've already decided." She never asked what kind of man he was. That night, I went to Noah's room and sat beside his bed. He was sketching some sort of spacecraft. "Are you going to live far away?" he asked, blinking sleepily. "Not too far," I smiled. "Just a big house with a dull view." "You'd dislike it." He grinned. "Maybe, but if they have a dog, I might visit." 2 weeks later, a car came to collect me. Not a limousine, just a black sedan with seats that smelled of leather and silence. The driver handed me a folder containing a one-way plane ticket, a confidentiality agreement, and a schedule. I read it once, then looked out the window. Vermont blurred past in patches of green and thawing gray, held tight to my coat, the same one I'd wear months later the night I left. I didn't have a better one, and maybe somewhere inside, I knew I wouldn't stay long enough to need more. Jonathan Hale met me at the entrance of his estate. Not with flowers, not even with a smile, just a nod. He didn't speak as he opened the front door, just held it open and gestured inside like I was another delivery. The house was breathtaking yet cold clean. High ceilings, soft light, and the echo of a home without memories. "You'll stay in the East Wing," he said. "Meals are scheduled. You're not expected to attend functions. This is a formality, not a union." His voice wasn't cruel, just trained, like a man who had learned that emotions were weaknesses best locked away. I nodded. I didn't expect warmth. I had signed away the right to expect anything. That night, I sat in my new room and stared at the wedding ring they had placed in a velvet box. Simple silver, no inscription, no story. I held it in my palm and remembered my mother's hands, her rings worn thin from years of kneading dough, holding babies, folding laundry. Her love had calluses. Mine had a contract. I wrote her a letter. Before bed, "I'm okay. The house is quiet. He is distant but not unkind. I have everything I need." And I meant it because I had chosen this with my own hands, with my own name. And if nothing else, I would make it mean something. Sometimes we sign not because we believe in what's written, but because we believe someone we love shouldn't have to. The first night passed like fog quiet, without shape. I didn't expect him to come to my room. We had made no vows, only a contract, a set of terms that didn't include warmth or welcome. But even so, I couldn't sleep. The bed was too large, the sheets too crisp, smelling faintly of cedar and something colder like paper, and distance. I lay there listening to the house breathe, the subtle hum of the heater, the wind moving through glass. Somewhere in the West Wing, he slept, or perhaps didn't. I turned to my side and stared at the faint outline of a wedding dress hanging in the closet. The staff had insisted I wear something appropriate for the ceremony earlier that day. I had refused. It didn't feel like a wedding, and I wouldn't pretend it was. We signed our names under a chandelier. That was it. He had offered me his arm not to hold, but to guide like you would an employee. "Is this enough?" he'd asked. "It will have to be," I had answered. We didn't exchange rings, only glances, his unreadable, mine reluctant. The photographer took one picture. We didn't smile. And now, in the silence of my assigned wing, I realized I wasn't scared of him. I was scared of vanishing, of becoming invisible in someone else's home, of being forgotten even while still living. Inside someone's walls. The next morning, I rose early. The windows looked out over frost-covered grass, the kind that cracked beneath footsteps. I made tea in the small kettle tucked in the corner of the room. There was no sugar, no lemon, just the bitterness of something hot held in cold hands. I stood by the window, sipping slowly. When I turned, I saw something I hadn't noticed the night before, a small framed sketch pinned to the wall. A house, a woman standing by a window alone. I stepped closer. The lines were sharp, precise, like someone had drawn it to remember. Something or someone. Had he placed this here on purpose? I didn't know, but I stared at it for a long time. We spoke again that evening. Dinner was served in the smaller dining room. I was told by the housekeeper that Mr. Hale prefers informal settings when not hosting. I stepped into the room, unsure if I was a guest, a resident, or something in between. He was already seated, reading something on his tablet. He looked up briefly when I entered, nodded once. Grace, Jonathan. That was it. The meal was quiet, delicious, but clinical like everything else here. Roasted chicken, wild rice, steamed asparagus, all plated like art but tasting faintly of distance. Halfway through, I asked, "Do you always eat like this?" He didn't look up. Like what? Alone. Perfect. Predictable. He paused, then not long, but enough to let the question sink in. It's efficient? I nodded, took another bite, and lonely. He looked at me, then really looked. For the first time since the signing, his eyes weren't unkind, just tired, guarded. Lonely is a feeling, not a state of being. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Lonely is a feeling. What a strange thing to say from a man who built a life designed to keep feelings out. I left my room after midnight not to find him, just to walk. The house was quiet, the lights dimmed low for night mode. I moved past the library, past the parlor where the piano sat untouched, and into the gallery hallway where old oil portraits hung like ghosts. I stopped at one, a woman, not young, not old, with eyes that mirrored his. Sharp, a little sad. A brass plate read Elaine Hale, 1960 to 1999. His mother, perhaps. A flicker of something twisted in my chest, the kind of ache that didn't belong to you, but you carried anyway out of shared human weight. I reached out and touched the frame. Couldn't sleep either. I turned. He stood at the end of the hall shirt, sleeves rolled, barefoot, hair mussed like he'd wrestled with his thoughts instead of pillows. I straightened instinctively, but he didn't move closer. He just leaned against the wall and watched me. She used to stand there too, he said quietly. My mother. Every night before she died, I never knew why. I didn't speak. Maybe to remember, or to forget. Still, I said nothing. He walked toward me slowly, then stopped a few feet away. This house wasn't built for people like you. I frowned. What kind of people am I? He didn't answer right away. The kind who hum when they cook, who touch picture frames like they matter. The kind who see a garden and want to grow something. Blinked. I don't hum when I cook. You did last Tuesday in the East Kitchen. You thought no one heard. That was the moment, not grand, not loud, but it shifted something between us. He didn't touch me, didn't move closer. But his eyes, God, his eyes were no longer mirrors. They were windows, slightly open. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. My breath caught. Good, I replied. Neither do I. He exhaled, almost smiled. Almost. Then he turned. You should sleep, he said. You matter more to this house than you think. And with that, he disappeared down the hallway, barefoot and quiet as a confession. Back in my room, I sat on the bed and looked again at the wedding dress in the closet. It was still untouched, still meaningless. But for the first time, I wondered maybe one day I'd finish it. Sometimes the most powerful things are not said, but seen. In the way someone doesn't leave, in the way they finally look back. A particular kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound. It comes from knowing something you were never supposed to know and waiting for the right moment to admit it. That was the silence that lived in Jonathan's eyes. I didn't see it at first, or maybe I refused to. But that morning, 2 days after, our midnight meeting in the gallery, when I entered the study to borrow a book and found his desk open, papers scattered in unusual mess, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. There, beneath a stack of ledgers and legal reports, was a copy of the marriage contract, not the redacted version I had received, but the original with my signature and my handwriting, still faintly visible from where I'd pressed too hard with the pen. I froze. There was no reason for that version to be here unless ... I stepped closer. My hands shook not from fear, but something heavier. Recognition, betrayal. He had known all this time. Every silent dinner, every carefully controlled word, every look that hovered somewhere between curiosity and avoidance. He had known that I signed the contract of my own will, that I wasn't forced, that I chose this, and he had said nothing. That night, I waited until the house had gone quiet. Then I knocked on his office door. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Do you always keep copies of contracts?" I asked, my voice even though Jonathan stood behind the desk, sleeves rolled, collar loosened. He didn't answer immediately, just placed the book he'd been holding down with deliberate care. Only the ones that matter. There was no panic in him, no guilt, only that same practiced calm, like a man used to walking over broken glass with bare feet. I stepped inside. You knew. He didn't deny it. You've always known, since the beginning. Still nothing. I walked further in, heart pounding. Then why didn't you say anything? Why let me pretend? Let me carry the weight of a lie I never told, but everyone believed? Jonathan's eyes met mine, unblinking, clear. Because I wanted to see if you would ever say it yourself. That answer knocked the air out of me, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He stepped around the desk slowly, stopping a few feet from where I stood. You came here with your head held high, but inside you were drowning in guilt. I saw it every day. You smiled at the staff. You arranged flowers in the hallway. You hummed when no one was around, but you never forgave yourself for what you did. What I did, I whispered, was save my family. I know. His voice softened. And it was the bravest thing I've seen in a very long time. That stunned me more than any accusation could have. He walked to the window, hands in his pockets. You think I didn't notice? The way you read every document before you signed it? The way you folded the pages so precisely, like they meant something? That's not how coerced women behave. That's how women with purpose behave. I stood in silence, unsure what to feel. I wanted to see what kind of woman you were, he said. Not because I doubted your worth, but because I didn't want to interfere with something you'd chosen. Even if that choice was you? He turned, leaned slightly against the window frame, especially if that choice was me. Something flickered inside me, not warmth, not yet, but the sense of being seen fully. Perhaps for the first time, I crossed my arms. So what now? You've seen enough? He shook his head. No, I've only just started looking. The room quieted again, but the silence was different, not cold, not sharp, just unfinished. Like a song paused mid-note, I left his study without another word, not angry, not pleased, just changed. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my room, sketchbook in my lap, staring at the half-finished wedding dress I'd started, drawing years ago. For some reason, I picked up a pencil and began shading in the missing parts, not for a ceremony, not for a man, just to remember that there were things I wanted to. The next morning, there was a small package outside my door. No. Inside, a silver thimble worn but polished, the kind seamstresses used decades ago. A quiet gift, a message without saying a word. I smiled, and for the first time since arriving at Hale Manor, I didn't feel like a ghost passing through. Someone sees your truth but lets you carry it until you're ready to share it. That is not silence, that is mercy. When I arrived home, the porch light was still off. The screen door creaked the way it always had, high-pitched and stubborn. I stepped inside without knocking, out of habit. The house smelled like cinnamon and thyme, the faint trace of something once warm, now folded into silence. It had been months. The kitchen table was exactly as I'd left it. The chipped mug I used for tea still sat on the shelf. The radio in the corner, long broken, was gathering dust. Nothing had changed except me. Mama was asleep on the couch, a quilt wrapped around her legs. Her breathing was shallow, but even. Her face, though thinner, still held the quiet grace that had always made people instinctively lower their voices. around her. I didn't wake her. I just stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, and wondered how many nights she'd stayed awake, imagining what my life had become. Behind me, the hallway creaked. Noah stood barefoot in his shirt too big, rubbing. His eyes, Gracie, hey, sweetheart. He blinked twice before running into my arms. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the weight of someone who trusted me completely. He was warm, smelling like soap and pencil shavings. You're back, just for a little while. Does he know? I shook my head. No, not yet. The next morning, Mama made oatmeal like she always had. No questions, no judgment. She didn't even ask why I was home. She just poured me a bowl and passed the honey without a word. We sat at the table like two women who'd lived too long with the consequences of other people's decisions. You look thinner, she said finally. So, do you? A pause. Then, I heard from the lawyer. My spoon stopped halfway to my mouth. She kept stirring her oatmeal like she was talking about the weather. I knew about the contract before you ever told me. My breath caught. How? He called. Gave me the same numbers, the same offer. I asked one question. I swallowed. What did you ask? Will she be safe? Her eyes met mine, then clear, fierce, familiar. And he said yes. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or betrayed. Why didn't you say something? Because you needed it to be your choice. She reached across the table, placed her hand over mine. Her skin was thin, veins visible, but her grip was steady. You were so used to carrying us. I couldn't add my weight to that. I needed to know you would sign because you believed it was right, not because I looked scared. A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. I felt so alone. I know, she whispered. That's how I knew you were doing it for love. Later that day, I sat with Noah under the oak tree in our backyard. He was showing me a drawing of a rocket ship. This one had little people waving from the windows. This one's going to Mars, he said proudly. Looks fast. It is. But they're not running away. They're going to start a new place, one with gardens and music and soft beds. I smiled. That sounds like home. You could come too. I kissed the top of his head. I'll think about it. That night, I lay in my old room. The wallpaper was still peeling near the corners. My old lamp still hummed when switched on. And on the nightstand sat a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, my father's watch, a dried corsage from prom, and a notebook of half-finished poems. Beneath it all, a note in Mama's handwriting I'd never seen before. It was dated a month before the contract. Grace, you've always had the strength to choose the hard thing. I wish I could take that burden from you, but I know I would only be stealing the pride that comes after. If you ever find yourself alone in a place that was supposed to hold you, remember that silence isn't always emptiness. Sometimes it's just space waiting to be filled with something real. I cried then, not out of sadness, but out of something deeper, release. For the first time, I understood that my mother's silence wasn't absence. It was permission to be the woman I needed to be, even if it meant letting her go the next morning. I stood at the window with a cup of tea and asked myself a question I'd avoided for months. Do I want to go back? And somewhere inside me, the answer rose soft but clear. Yes. Not because I owed him anything, not because it was written in a contract, but because he hadn't tried to hold me. And somehow, that had made me want to stay. Sometimes love is not proven by how hard someone tries to keep you, but by how gently they let you go when they know they shouldn't. I didn't tell him I was coming back. There was no phone call, no letter this time, no formal arrangement or scheduled return. I simply packed a small bag and boarded the train at dawn, wrapped in the same gray coat I'd worn the day I left. The ride back was quiet, the windows fogged with condensation. My fingers traced the edge of the ticket for no reason except to calm the rhythm of my pulse. I wasn't nervous, just uncertain, and oddly, that was comforting. Uncertainty meant the choice was mine when the taxi pulled into the gravel driveway of Hale Manor. The house looked exactly as I'd left it, imposing still, elegant, but not cold anymore. Just quiet. I stood outside for a moment, my hand resting on the gate. The same white chrysanthemums still bloomed along the front path. Someone had kept them alive. I had a feeling I knew who the front door opened before I knocked. It wasn't Jonathan, it was Mrs. Lee, the housekeeper. She didn't say anything, just smiled softly and stepped aside like she'd been waiting. I stepped inside, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since I left. There was no sign of him at first. The house was still and stillness itself, not empty, just respectfully waiting. I set my bag down by the staircase and walked toward the east wing. In my room, still untouched, I found something resting on the windowsill, a box wrapped in simple parchment. No ribbon, no card. Inside, a piece of fabric, ivory silk, and beneath it, folded carefully, was a sketch. My wedding dress, but not the version I'd abandoned. This one was completed, every line drawn with care, every detail finished in ink and pencil. I stared at it, stunned. He had found my old drawings. He had seen them, and without saying a word, he had finished what I could not a quiet offering, a way of saying, I see you even when you don't say anything. I turned when I heard footsteps behind me. He stood in the doorway, no suit today, just a sweater. Sleeves pushed up, expression unreadable. You came back, he said, not as a question, but as a fact. I did. We stood in silence, that familiar kind, not the cold one, but the kind that waits. Why? He asked. I could have said many things that I missed the tea, the space, the quiet, but I told the truth. Because you didn't ask me to? He didn't react, just looked at me like he was still trying to understand something he didn't believe he deserved. I thought I'd failed, he admitted. When you left, you didn't. But I didn't try to stop you. That's why I came back. He walked slowly into the room, keeping space between us like he always had. I wasn't sure if I had the right to ask you to stay, to be anything more than a placeholder in your story. That broke something soft in me. I moved closer, not all the way, but enough that our words didn't have to cross oceans. You were never a placeholder, Jonathan. I just didn't know how to be seen without disappearing. He looked at the sketch again, then back at me. I finished it because I hoped someday you'd finish it for real. I nodded, eyes stinging. I think I'd like to try. He didn't rush forward. He didn't kiss me or pull me into some cinematic embrace. He simply sat down at the small bench near the window, looked up at me and said, then stay. Not as my wife, not as a name on a page, but as Grace. Just Grace, I asked, half smiling. That's all I've ever wanted. We had dinner that night in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, just the simple, narrow kitchen where the pans were slightly dented and the table was too small. He let me cook. I insisted we didn't talk much, but he watched me as I moved like he was memorizing something sacred. And maybe in some quiet way, he was. Afterward, we sat by the fire. He didn't touch me, but he didn't look away. Before going upstairs, I paused beside him. Jonathan, yes, I'm pregnant. He blinked once, took a breath, nodded slowly. Is it yours? I said gently, silence again, and then he reached for my hand very slowly, like asking permission with every inch. I gave it. He held it between. His looked down at it. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a mother. He smiled, just barely. Maybe we figure it out together. That night, I slept in my room, but the air was warmer. The sheets didn't feel foreign. And when I opened the drawer of the nightstand, I found a cup of herbal tea, still warm. No, just steam curling like a promise. Not all loves start with fire. Some begin with patience, with silence, with a door left unlocked and a cup of tea that says, I'm here if you want to come back. The next morning, he was already in the kitchen when I came down, no suit. Just jeans and a faded gray shirt that made him look, for once, like someone who didn't live behind glass walls and shareholder meetings. He was trying clumsily to make pancakes and failing. There was batter on the counter, a pan too hot, and a plate of lopsided attempts that looked more like maps than meals. I stood in the doorway watching him. For a man who once signed $1 million deals before breakfast, this felt oddly heroic. You're burning them, I said softly. He didn't look up. I Googled a recipe. It lied. I smiled, walked in, gently nudged him aside, and turned down the heat. Cooking isn't about precision. It's about attention. I'm learning. You're trying, I corrected. That's different and better. We ate together on the back patio. It was a quiet morning cloud shifting slowly above the trees, the scent of early spring beginning to mix with leftover winter. There were birds somewhere out of sight, and beside me, a man who wasn't asking for forgiveness or a reward, just presence. Do you want it? I asked finally. He looked up. What? The child. The life, the noise, the mess. A pause. He looked at his plate, then back at me. I want whatever comes from you. His voice didn't shake. Not because I feel entitled to it, or because the contract says I should, but because I think if something grows out of you, it must be something good. I didn't speak for a moment. There were no fireworks in that sentence, no grand declaration, just quiet, unwavering trust, the kind I never knew I needed until I heard it. Later that afternoon, I found him in the greenhouse. I didn't know he had one hidden at the far end of the estate. Behind a row of hedges was a small, sun-dappled building filled with pots, soil, and herbs arranged in imperfect rows. He was watering rosemary when I stepped inside. I started this when I couldn't sleep, he said, not turning around. It helped. You garden? No, I fail at gardening, but I try. I walked closer slowly. The air smelled of earth, mint, and something warm I couldn't name. I used to help my mom grow things, I said. She called it a form of prayer. Then I guess I've been praying, he said. He turned to face me. For forgiveness, for grace. I blinked. That's my name. I know. He stepped forward, hesitated, then gently placed his hand on my belly, not possessive, not claiming, just reverent. I don't want to be the man I was, he said. You're not, I whispered. Not anymore. He didn't cry. Jonathan Hale never cried, but his shoulders relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. Like he finally believed he was allowed to stop holding the world together. That evening, he brought me a chair from the attic, a rocker, old but sturdy.